If you're a human in Warhammer 40K, your life is going to suck. The galaxy is considered grimdark for a reason. Everything is terrifying and everything is trying to kill you. And that's what we're going to explore today in another deep dive video as we look into just how horrible the lore is. Starting off with being a simple Imperial citizen.
Born into misery, the chances of being part of Imperial high society and living a fulfilling life is extremely small. The only citizens of the Imperium that get to experience the luxury of advanced technology and basic freedom of choice are rogue traders, high lords, and planetary governors. In order to be lucky enough to be part of this social class, one would have to be a descendant of a king or ruler that bent the knee and was given permission by the Emperor of mankind to continue their rule. Not to mention that one's family would have to be lucky enough not to get their entire lineage destroyed in the 10,000 years since the Great Crusade. The reality is that life in the Imperium would either mean being born a poor worker and struggling to survive in a hive city or manufactorum, or be a forced recruit into the Imperial Guard. In other words, the majority of Imperial citizens are slaves to the Imperial war machine. There are no workers' rights or safety protocols in the manufactorums that you would work in. Workers would fall into boiling vats of material or get crushed beneath colossal manufacturing machines on a daily basis. The deceased workers would be easily replaced by the millions of hive citizens waiting their turn to work in these giant death traps. To make matters worse, instead of developing a safeguard in order to prevent similar deaths from occurring, the accident would be seen as the angst of the machine spirit towards a worker who was mistreating the machine. And sadly, the blame would fall on this dead machine operator. The simple suggestion to alter the design of a machine in order to make it safer would be an insult to the machine spirit and blasphemy to the Omnissiah. Wages and salaries are paid out not in thrones, the imperial currency, but rather credits specific to the manufactorum the individual works in. The manufactorum would offer stores and markets to shop in, but if you wanted to take those credits to any other place in the hive city, it would be worthless. This is another method to enslave the manufactorum workers. Work itself would never stop, because war never stops. As long as the Imperium needs resources to fuel the war effort, the manufactorum would be required to pump out the materials. 20-hour workdays would be required, only giving you enough time to return to your quarters and get up to 3 to 4 hours of sleep. The life expectancy of workers would be extremely short, the working and living conditions pushing the risks of suicide and sickness to levels equivalent to humanity's age of strife. The desire to raise children of your own in this world would completely disappear. The only driving force on reproduction would be that required by the planet itself. For those Imperial citizens that struggle to meet population growth, forced artificial insemination and vital womb techniques would be mandated to all citizens. The chances of developing a strong family bond on these planets would be extremely thin. Most children would be raised separate from their original parents. Traveling would be as dangerous as entering a war zone. If you ever were required to travel from one hive city to another, the stretch of land between the two cities would be a wasteland. To step into these lands and simply breathe the air would mean certain death because of the toxic fumes found all throughout the planet. Even with protective equipment, the atmosphere of one's planet would be completely foreign. Most citizens never leave their own section of the hive city, let alone leave the hive city itself. The sunlight itself would be something completely new to you, because most sunlight never makes it into the main hive city, although the sun rays would actually be deadly to anyone not in protective gear. Once on the road between the hive cities, you run the risk of being attacked by all sorts of unforgiving life. The toughest organisms in the galaxy inhabit these wastelands. Things like mutant hordes that might attack your transport in the hopes of finding something valuable. Worst of all, you may encounter feral orc warbands. These are the remnants of an ancient invasion fought on your planet. These greenskins will want nothing more than to see your head crushed between their two hands. Traveling inside your own hive city has its dangers. One wrong turn and you could get lost in the maze of corridors and passageways. City gangs roam the streets of these hives, waiting for lost travelers to rob or kill. There is no law in many of these hive cities. You may have to rely on your neighbors for protection. If a street gang is strong enough, they could loot your entire hive block, and there is nothing you can do about it. The policing structure that does form from your community is oftentimes corrupted. The men that you see as a police force is just another gang that has found it more beneficial not to steal from you today, but that's not guaranteed for tomorrow. In most hive cities, new structures are built on top of older structures, and oftentimes the old crumbles under the pressure of the new, leaving entire housing complexes or dining halls as giant tombs, their inhabitants crushed or trapped with no hope of rescue. Your devotion to the Imperial Creed would be silently monitored. You would never truly know who or when they would be watching you, but you would know of their presence whenever someone around you would be punished or killed due to a lack of worship. Any murmur of defiance, resistance, or questioning towards any authority figure would be considered a lack of faith to the God Emperor and subsequent execution. This means that by simply correcting your boss at work or questioning the labor you perform is enough to be executed for blasphemy. For those individuals that get sick, getting proper medical attention would be almost impossible. Oftentimes, you would simply be given strong drugs that would serve as a painkiller. That is, of course, if your illness was not infectious. These drugs that are meant to help you would most likely impair your ability to perform your job, and oftentimes an accident at work or during your commute would end your life. If you were lucky enough to die, you would be free from the horrible outcome that befalls any who get sick or injured and are given over to the Adeptus Mechanicus. The Adeptus Mechanicus would mind wipe and turn you into a servitor, a lobotomized aid that's somewhere between a man and a machine, but never free will. Because of the cramped conditions of a hive city, if anyone were to contract a contagious disease, that disease would spread throughout the entire hive, like wildfire on a dry plain. Being infected would be all but inevitable. If you were the first to be found with this virus, you would be executed on sight. The risk of a hive-wide plague would be too great a threat, and you and everyone you came in contact with would be exterminated. Your death would go unnoticed by the majority of the population of your hab block. Only the few friends and family that were around you at the hour of your death would truly know the horrible fate that befell you. The information surrounding your death might be recorded by some data-collecting servoskull and passed off to the Adeptus Administratum, but access to this information would be completely restricted. Even if a friend who witnessed your death and wanted to share the terrible news, he would be limited to those within his hab block. Long-distance communication would be too difficult or just outright impossible. The thick walls of plasteel and iron that form the bulk of the hive cause significant interference to Vox broadcasts, so only individuals who have access to Vox amplification towers would be able to share the message of your death. This terrible existence would plague the mind and soul of all Imperial citizens, but for these unfortunate souls, hope would exist in the scriptures and hymns of the Imperial Creed. All Imperial citizens would develop a feverish worship of the God Emperor, for the simple fact that his existence gives each person a small bit of purpose. Stories of the Emperor's vast armies that crush the mutant, the heretic, and the Xenos, along with tales of mythical angels of death that fight tirelessly to allow each citizen to live, would fuel the small hope that each poor citizen needs to survive. While to outsiders this devotion would seem as a forced coping mechanism, and that the average Imperial citizen's compliance to these living conditions would seem as a form of slavery, to the vast populace of the Imperium, however, the God Emperor is their salvation.
Now let's say you're not just a basic Imperial citizen and you got lucky and become one of the Imperium's greatest warriors, a Space Marine. Is life better for you? Unfortunately not.
To be a Space Marine is to be seen as an angel of the God Emperor made flesh. Every Space Marine exudes awe and fear, whether stomping through battlefields or the Imperial Palace. But behind the ornate power armor and the honorable heraldry lies a sinister truth, one of brutal sacrifice and appalling reality. These are known as the horrible realities of a Space Marine's life. The sorrow of a Space Marine doesn't begin during his induction into his chapter, or even before the minuscule spark of his potential greatness is spotted by an Astarte chaplain. It begins long before, when a child is pushed down the unfortunate path completely out of his control that will eventually mold him to be a prime recruit for the greatest of the Emperor of Mankind's warriors. Every Space Marine has a brutal past of abuse, long before they become demigods in the eyes of mortal men. A chaplain handpicks his recruits, all of which are adolescents or very young adults. oftentimes as young as 10 years old. But even by this tender age, these recruits display a natural psychotic killer instinct. What horrible experiences must befall a 10-year-old boy to cause him to lack basic empathy and instead nurture an instinct of savagery can vary, but the sad reality is that to be a Space Marine is to have suffered since birth. The most common planet Space Marines collect recruits from are feral worlds. These are places where danger is found around every single corner. The harsh environment of the world has made it impossible for the human population living there to evolve past the tribal or nomadic state. The ancient settlers of these worlds were shunned from communication with a wider Imperium due to environmental abnormalities, be they warp-driven or biological, and so they are devoid of the technological sophisticated gifts of the Adeptus Mechanicus. The children that come from these worlds have lived through experiences that would be considered nightmares to even the common Imperial citizen. To be born on this type of planet is to be guaranteed a life devoid of peace and happiness. They are raised on worlds filled with predators. They have seen beasts that tower over humans and have the power to snap a full-grown man in two with a simple flick of the wrist. Some have traveled through waters filled with unknown creatures that lurk in the shadowy depths. They have experienced the dread of watching their tribesmen drowned by these sea monsters, then leaving the dead bodies to float on the water surface. They have come from worlds where more often than not, they are the ones hunted, where giant airborne creatures swoop down and pick them off like hawks preying on mice, or where feline creatures sit and wait to ambush unaware travelers. These children have seen the horrible ways the galaxy has mutated the human form, grotesque abnormalities driving whole tribes insane and pushing them down a path of savagery to the point where they are robbed of their own humanity. The plants and animals they rely on these worlds can turn on their own caretakers in the blink of an eye. One minute a child is watering his garden, the next the vines of the plants are wrapping tighter around the child's neck. The savagery of the environment often spreads into the tribes of humans that populate the planet. Tribes go to war for the little resources the planet offers them. Humans kill humans as a means of survival, and children live through the murder of their own parents as they are taken by one of these many horrible realities that a feral world has in store. That is, of course, if the boy was not already born an orphan. On other recruitment worlds, the quality of life for future Astartes is no better. Hive worlds are often perfect cultivators for truly psychotic killers, for in these cramped and filthy cities, hive gangs flourish, and the strong prey on the weak. For those unfortunate children, hive cities are where children are bartered and sold to become workers of manufactorums, or foot soldiers for their owners' hive gangs. Sometimes babies are ripped from their mothers and become payment for long-standing debts. Potential Space Marines begin their path to their chapter without even knowing, as hive gangs mold their abducted children into killing machines. As soon as they are old enough to hold the last pistol, these children are sent into rival gang territory to shoot indiscriminately and deliver a brutal message on behalf of their gang lords. They are injected with chemicals to increase their aggression and at the same time take their mind off the pain and regret they feel for the actions they commit. Dependence on these drugs grow year after year until they cannot get out of bed without an injection of some stimulant. Foot soldiers need to be replenished, and at the cost of mental scarring, the children must induct new recruits and force them through the same abuse that was placed on them only a few years ago. In the end, to be chosen by a chaplain of the Adeptus Astartes indicates a horrible upbringing. A few Space Marine chapters do not recruit from these agonizing worlds. They will take their neophytes from honorable warrior conclaves or from highborn society. But to these future recruits, the pain and suffering has only been delayed, for even these future neophytes will experience the dread of the aspirant trial and the indoctrination process that all battle brothers must go through. Once selected as an aspirant, the 10-year-old starts his trials. The trials vary from chapter to chapter, but all of these traditional feats of strength are designed to push out the aspirants whom are too weak for the future that awaits them. In most chapters, the aspirants must fight each other. Sometimes the children will be given melee weapons like swords, clubs, or spears. Sometimes they are given nothing at all and are left to fight each other with their bare fists. The one common feature of these blood duel trials is that in the end, it is death. The aspirants fight round after round, only progressing until their opponent is laying lifeless on the floor. Other chapters expect their aspirants to hunt down the same creatures that plague their past. Predatory creatures from feral worlds, lethal Dark Eldar, and even barbarous green-skinned orcs. These are all creatures that the aspirant must track down and kill. All of these aspirant trials have one expected outcome: the death of the majority of the aspirants. The few that remain will continue down the painful path into the indoctrination process. To become a Space Marine, the aspirant must be implanted with the gene seed organs that will turn him into an Astarte. A painful and agonizing process that will last about 8 years. The neophyte will go through this incredible biological change that will bring unfathomable pain. While his body is going through numerous cycles of breaking and healing, the neophyte's mind will be probed by his Space Marine masters. Their deepest, darkest memories will be taken and played on repeat, purposefully made to seem never-ending in the hopes of breaking the mind. The day the child watched his mother die, the day his body was severely burned, the day he first witnessed the horrors of the warp. Probes will search every corner of the mind in the hopes of finding the best memory to test the child. If no memory is sufficient enough in the eyes of the Astarte, a fake memory will be created, one that will not be distinguishable as false, in the hopes of testing the mind and guaranteeing it's not found wanting. At this point on the path to becoming an Astarte, most neophytes will go insane, driven mad by the constant picking and poking of their minds. The majority that succumb to the madness will be lobotomized and turned into chapter servitors, a sad outcome to a child warrior that has gone through so much. For all of those that survive the grueling 8 years awaits a sinister reality, because after the physical and psychological testing, the person that existed before is completely gone. Each Astarte is stripped of his past, his name long erased from the memory of the demigod that stands before his chapter. In many ways, the process of becoming an Astarte kills the child that was there before. Recollection of his life before becoming a Space Marine is almost impossible, and for an Astarte to even take the time to try to remember his past life would seem pointless to this stoic warrior of the Emperor. One can even agree that the whole ordeal is the chapter's way of stealing children, brainwashing neophytes, and implanting transhumans with new identities, ones that are easily controlled and directed to perform the Imperium's bidding. When stripped of the power, the ceremony, and the authority, there is very little that sets a Space Marine's recruitment process apart from the recruitment process of a hive gang. The end result is the same: an abiding servant capable of killing at a simple command. Once a full-fledged battle brother, the life of a Space Marine is most often a regimental ritual, a cycle of prayer, training, eating, and sleeping. The praying is done multiple times a day, and at least once in front of a chapter's chaplain. This ceremony is spoken of as a venerating process, but the truth is that it is a re-indoctrination process made to remind the Marine that his life is not his own, but it belongs to the God Emperor and nothing else. The mind of a Space Marine is dulled to accept his lifestyle, only broken free when asked to murder in the name of the Emperor. But even the actions of a Space Marine are not coming from his own will, but rather the will of the Emperor. The strength and glory of becoming a demigod comes with a prize, and that prize is individual freedom. When out of the fortification of a fortress monastery and exposed to the many threats that exist in the galaxy, a Space Marine will inevitably be confronted with a sad reality. This reality will be made clear upon the first encounter with a mortal human. The sad, defenseless creature he once was and must now fight to protect. Most Space Marines will find the average military commander or High Lord an annoyance to speak to. Their primitive grasp on reality compared to the advanced Astarte mind is equivalent to a human watching a mouse run a maze. The constant bickering and lack of resolve is the true reason most Space Marines choose to fight on their own terms. The worst part is the reality that a Space Marine dies for this primitive creature. A Space Marine is forced to sacrifice everything in an effort to allow this weak, senseless Imperium of man exist. Space Marines must live with the knowledge of the disapproval the Emperor himself would have on humans. The Imperial Truth outlawed his worship, and yet entire planetary sectors erect cathedral after cathedral. Silently, the Astarte is forced to stand vigil over a population that had strayed so far from the Emperor's true teachings and continues to bastardize the work of the Great Crusade with corruption and petty infighting. And while most of the Space Marines that have come before have been able to find comfort in the knowledge that they alone stand above all of the other defenders of the Imperium of Man, that position is short-lived with the introduction of the Primaris Marines. Astartes, loyal to the Imperium, even through the defamation of the Emperor's teachings, raised with the belief that they have been gifted the holy gene seed of the Primarchs themselves, are now pushed aside by a stronger and more revered class of warrior. The psychological trauma that will befall a Space Marine who will be outclassed in every aspect of war is incredibly profound. Space Marines of old become a shadow of their superior brethren and their Primaris gene seed.
So now you can see that even a Space Marine has a terrible life in 40K, but what about another of the Imperium's elite warriors, an Imperial assassin? Would your life be any better? Unfortunately not.
One of the Imperium of Man's most reliable tools in the extermination of threats to humanity is the hidden blade known as the Imperial assassin. These masters of butchery are known as the slayers of kings and false messiahs, the bane of traitors and rebels across the stars. But despite the effectiveness of these warriors, there lies a sad and unpleasant side to their lives. These are the horrible realities of an Imperial assassin. Much like the Space Marine, the sad truth of an assassin begins in their adolescence. You see, the majority of these future expert executioners, or orphans, often taken days, if not moments, before their whole family's death. While the worlds of the Imperium are filled with stray children, those that come from Imperial families are taken in by the Schola Progenium, whether they are daughters of Imperial Guard officers killed on the battlefield, or sons of Imperial administrators lost in the far reaches of space. These abandoned children are taken in and trained to become the backbone of Imperial society, as servants of the various branches of the Adeptus Terra. Some will go on to become distinguished Militarum Tempestus Scions, the elite of the Imperial Guard. Others will become famous inquisitors, or at least inquisitorial acolytes. But those that show a sign of malice towards their fellow man will be separated from the pack, never to be heard from again. These children will always be those that demonstrate an affinity for murder, whether they were born with this predisposition for slaughter, or their circumstances cause them to grow a sadistic desire to kill. These children will have their minds, body, and soul disciplined in the hopes that their vicious nature can be used by the Officio Assassinorum. An assassin's training begins even before the Assassinorum ships arrive on Terra, with the Officio instructors testing their prospective pupils mercilessly. The recruits must survive on limited food. They are given rations slightly below what a normal person would need to survive. How they will handle the malnutrition is a test in and of itself. The restriction of resources sometimes even consists of restricting the air they breathe. Their living quarters will be purposefully suffocated for solar days at a time, causing the weaker recruits to repeatedly pass out and eventually die. After the first week, instructors will survey the recruits, making sure to separate the dead from the comatose and disposing of the bodies before they are cannibalized by the more resilient recruits. Those that adapt to the harsh conditions will be pushed further when they are forced to fight each other in armed and unarmed combat. These battles will start off simple enough, but the closer the ship gets to their destination, the more challenging the duels will become. Recruits will be forced to fight in all manner of conditions, from total darkness to blinding light, zero gravity to crushing weight, muggy heat to freezing cold. By the time they arrive, there may only be a tenth of the prospective assassins left. If the instructors see the recruits barely clinging to life, they may deem every recruit unworthy and execute them all on the spot. Upon arrival at Holy Terra, the surviving initiates begin the next stage of their training. Sailing past the spaceborne basilicas, immense queues of pilgrim craft, and the military cordons that congest Terra's outer orbit, they are carried down into the Temple Assassinorum under the most advanced of shrouding protocols. In the subterranean safe houses, These new recruits are divided amongst the hidden temples of the Officio Assassinorum. Each temple has its own ancient ways and mysteries, and each specializes in a different aspect of the art of murder. There the initiates train for a full decade under the command of a Lord Assassin. For recruits entering the Calidus Temple, their souls will be tested when they eventually learn of the existence of the ruinous powers of chaos. The Calidus Assassins are experts at eradicating Chaos Cult leaders. In order to do this, most assassins are required to infiltrate the Chaos Cult, which means living amongst Chaos worshippers. A future Calidus assassin must not only be effective enough to terminate the target, but also possess the utmost devotion to the Emperor of Mankind, as to not fall prey to the temptations of the Chaos Gods while masquerading as a cultist. How this loyalty is ingrained in the minds of an assassin varies, but for most Calidus recruits, it means daily prayer along with self-flagellation. This self-deprecation begins early on. Instructors will force initiates to crawl on their knees and recite Imperial Creed hymns until the bare bone of their knees scrape on the Pharaoh Creed floor and trails of blood mark the recruit's path of suffering. The pain of these types of exercises demonstrates the recruit's devotion to the Emperor of Mankind and acts as a reminder of the suffering they will face if they turn away from his light. Calidus assassins are also well known for their ability to impersonate almost any humanoid creature by using polymorph, a specialized drug that allows the assassin to take on the look of anyone they choose. This can be as simple as a beautiful young woman or as elaborate as a crippled old man. The temple has even taken it a step further by implanting recruits with a range of surgical implants to allow Calidus assassins to mimic members of alien races, like the Kroot and the Eldar. These implants consist of flexed cartilage and hardened synth skin, similar to that used in the Black Carapace gene seed organ of the Space Marines. When the assassin is in their normal form, these implants lie dormant under their flesh within their bones. It is only when the polymorphine is injected that these implants react to the stimulants within the drug and transform into a genetically encoded shape that allows the assassin to restructure their body into the grotesque and hunched form of an orc, or the thin and graceful form of an Eldari. The implants are not surgically embedded in one go, and a recruit must experience the long and grueling process of not only implantation, but also the painful task of learning to live with the implants. Over the centuries, the Calidus Temple has come to learn that a female recruit is more capable of surviving these grafts. They've realized that the female body and psyche is biologically predisposed to enduring higher levels of pain, making female Calidus recruits better chameleons than men. As such, almost all Calidus assassins are actually women, regardless of who they are trying to impersonate. Another class of assassin that will forever be altered by their training is the Eversor assassins. These killers specialize in shock and terror tactics, instilling fear of Imperial retribution into the hearts and minds of all those who hold positions of power in the Imperium of man. Unlike other assassins, these murderers take their time out on the field, often not only having one target, but a mission to create as much destruction as possible to an entire organization. To have the energy and raw power to successfully sow this much fear on a target, the killers must never rest, never sleep, and never stop giving rise to slaughter. They are pumped with special cocktails of combat-enhancing drugs that are designed to instill psychotic rage into the assassin, and to further enhance their physical capabilities, to the point that it strains even their enhanced physiologies. Knowing how physically straining their missions will be, the temple begins enhancing the recruits' immune systems right away. It goes beyond the normal human standards so that they can survive the sheer toxicity of the combat drugs they will constantly be infused with. Fresh recruits will go through their first year in an intoxicated mist of combat drugs. They will get so incredibly high that they will run the risk of losing a grasp on reality. Hallucinations will get so severe that a recruit's body will simply enter a coma to deal with the shock. Those that survive this phase will wake up to a shortened lifespan, a horrible effect caused by the cocktail of drugs flowing through their bodies. They will then move on to the cybernetic enhancement phase, where they will be implanted with a series of painful bionics that will turn them into the perfect killing machine. By the time the training is over, an Eversor assassin will be fully addicted to the harsh regime of combat drugs, to the point where if the infusion ever stops, the assassin will likely die from the agonizing withdrawal symptoms. But at that point, the killer's life is no longer their own. To combat this dependency and the shortened lifespan, the temple will have these new recruits enter cryosuspension. Each assassin is kept in cryostasis aboard very special and very secret starships and space stations that are placed all across the Imperium in highly secure locations and kept on constant alert. Only when the direct order is received from the High Lords of Terra, through the Grand Master of the Assassins of the Officio Assassinorum, does the operative fully awaken. Once a mission has been assigned, an Eversor assassin is transferred from his cryogenic crypt into a specially designed one-man drop pod. The assassin remains in stasis this entire time, while direct cybernetic neural links within the pod feed all the relevant mission details directly into the neural cortex. When the Temple's starship has come out of the warp near the target planet, the drop pod's fully automated system begins to awaken the assassin from stasis and prepare his body with the necessary suit of combat drugs that best fit the mission profile. By the time the drop pod reaches the surface of the target world, the Eversor assassin has fully awoken and been equipped to carry out the operation. Due to the use of cryosuspension to keep the assassin alive, an Eversor Temple assassin loses all grasp of time. He or she has no idea how long it's been since they were last awakened. It could have been a few solar decades, or even Terran centuries since the last time they were allowed to live. Worst of all for an Eversor assassin is if the assassin is slain in combat. The drugs flowing through their body will react violently to the metabolic onset of death and cause the Eversor's corpse to simply explode. If the assassin does survive the mission, a dark slumber awaits him. Not all assassin recruits come from the Schola Progenium, however. The Calixis Temple works with the dreaded Black Ships to collect their recruits. The Temple specializes in the assassination of psychically powerful leaders, and as such, they need assassins born with the innate ability to counteract the psychic powers controlled by their prey. To do this, they recruit child prisoners who possess the feared pariah gene, often called Black Souls, or simply the Soulless. These recruits have a rare mutation that not only causes them to lack any psychic presence in the warp, but also nullify any warp effects around them. Their aura of otherness is so powerful that normal humans find it impossible to be in their presence. Before their life with the Temple, they were treated with disgust, not because of any action they caused, but simply out of human nature. Treated like outcasts, these future assassins were probably mistreated as children and kicked out as soon as possible by their own parents. As the living embodiment of the worst possible nightmares for any psychically gifted being, even before they are trained, some recruits would have been hunted down by psychically powerful members of the Imperium before being captured by the Black Ships. Even the Vindicare assassin, which arguably has the least tragic life, must face the horrible realities of an assassin. The Vindicare are often employed in eliminating individuals for the Imperium who are suspected of harboring demonic entities. The hope is that they can eliminate the host before the demon is able to manifest itself in the material plane. Like almost all killers, the Vindicare recruits are subjected to daily battles with bone-wrenching exercise engines. They must fight in deadly bouts with horrendous monsters to prepare themselves for the horrors that they must eliminate should their shot miss its mark. Initiates must survive lengthy courses of psycho-indoctrination and aggressive hypnosis to prepare their minds for the terrors of the warp. Assassins must undergo physical tests of ever-escalating severity and digest vast quantities of information about the Imperium that will soon be their hunting ground. They must train to the point where the Vindicare signature weapon, the Exodus rifle, is an extension of their own being. Like all assassins, they must accept that their lives are not their own, but rather they are mere weapons to destroy the enemies of mankind. And these are the only horrible realities of the assassin documented in Imperial records. It is known that the Officio Assassinorum hides many secrets in its dark and mysterious temples. The hidden orders of the Assassinorum conceals masterpieces of destruction, some of which were devised by the Primarchs, Malcador the hero, and even the Emperor himself. Truly, it is said that each temple houses 1,000 deaths and more.
So as you can see, it doesn't matter what you are in the Imperium or where you are in the Imperium, life is gonna suck for you. There is just so many horrible realities that are surrounding the entire grimdark universe. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, hit the like button, tell YouTube you want to see more of this type of content, comment down in the comment section below, it really helps out the channel when you do that, and share this with your friends on Facebook, Reddit, whatever social media you guys use. If you guys want to support the channel, you can by giving us a super thanks. If not, supporting us on Patreon, the link is in the description below. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we will talk tomorrow. This is Gersh1 with One Mind Syndicate, signing out.
Oh, if you could put my freedom first.